Thank you, everyone. It's a real honor to be here tonight. I want to thank the President and the Academy for bringing me here today and arranging for this opportunity to talk to all of you and to spend a little time thinking about social media. As somebody who works in a university that is roughly as old as this building, 1754, 1755, very similar, it's hard to be the guy who thinks about social media, because everybody there is thinking in terms of centuries and thinking about long, deep, meaningful work. And here's the guy who thinks in 140 characters. So it sometimes can be a little awkward, but somehow I have survived 20 years at Columbia and at Columbia Journalism School. Today I will be talking about Facebook and Twitter and some of the other new platforms, but I really want this to be an opportunity to have a conversation with all of you and to share ideas and to kind of see where things are. I've just spent some time thinking about some new ways in which we should be working and thinking and using social media. One of my thoughts about it is that you will only use it if you can find a way to fit it into your workflow and your life flow. If you don't find it in both, you won't use it. A couple of people came up to me and said, I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on Facebook. And I said, that's fine, I'm not here to convert you, I promise. But I do want to share some kind of big picture ideas, but also some very specific, small techniques that you might actually want to deploy in your own use of social media if you do use it. A word about Hedy Lamarr. What an amazing actress who also shows that you can be involved in more than one sphere of life. She's an inventor, as you know, and a lot of the things that we think about today in terms of communications can be directly traced to some of the ideas that she had several decades ago. But it also tells you what a special woman she was. I guarantee you there will be no Angelina Jolie lecture in technology, and no Madonna lecture in technology, and no Julia Roberts lecture in technology. There will only be Hedy Lamarr lectures in technology. I wanted to give you all my contact information because I'd like this to be the first, I hope, of many opportunities for us to talk to each other. You have my email address right here and my website, which is www.sree.net. It's not Sree.com. Sree.com is a chain of motels in Florida. So the importance of your cyber identity is going to be something we'll be talking about, I hope, throughout this, and I'll give you plenty of time for questions as well so that you can ask me anything you like. You have, as you saw, my Twitter handle as well as my Facebook, my two Facebook websites. I also have a social media guide, which is bit.ly/Sreesoc, S-R-E-E-S-O-C, and there you can find all my items and notes about social media. I'll also post this lecture there so that you can take a look at it if you like tonight. You can find it there, or again at Sree.net. I also have my own hashtag that I use to kind of keep track of people as they tweet about my lectures. I call it the ability for me to have you talk about me behind my back to my face, so I can go back later and read what you have said about me. I do want to clarify, and let me check with Andy, is it HLL 12 or HLL 2012? It's HLL 2012, so that's my mistake, and this is one of the problems with Twitter, is how easy it is to be confused. I went online and I found some HLL 12. I didn't realize it's HLL 2012, so please use HLL 2012 as the hashtag. One of the founders of Twitter said he's been surprised how successful Twitter has been considering how complicated it is to use. And this is an example that, you can make a mistake. Even though you spend all your time thinking about this, you can make a mistake. But one of the things we do in social media is we acknowledge the mistakes we make, we correct, and we move on. So that's what we are going to do. I'm delighted that one of my really good friends is here in the audience. That is a gentleman named Christoph Poschenrieder, and that's us at the outside near the Opera House, and that's him sitting there with his wife Daniela. There are in fact at least 3 Danielas in the audience. I think we're over the Daniela quota for the Academy tonight. But Christoph, would you wave please for a second? Christoph and I went to Columbia Journalism School together 20 years ago. He's the first man I ever sent an email message to. In 1992, we had nobody to send email messages to. If you might remember, some of you are old enough to remember 1992 and the early 90s, and some of you are not. But you will remember that that was one of the hardest things, that you may have had email, but you had no one to write to. But I had Christoph, and I was able to write to him, and it's really special that he and Daniela came from Munich to be here for, in part for this session, so I'm really delighted. I'm a big believer in connecting the physical and the virtual, the online and the real world. Throughout my talk today, you'll hear me refer to those ideas, that we must be connecting the physical and the digital. And so there's the physical and there's the digital. My friend Christoph, who is very advanced technologically and always has been, he taught me a lot of when we were trying to do editing on video, and he already had email before I did. He's a novelist living in Munich and is working on his 3rd novel, and he has very thoughtfully and with great understanding decided not to be on Facebook or Twitter. So I told him that I will post this on Facebook, and you'll have no idea what I'm going to be saying about you. And so I just posted it on Facebook, and one of the first complaints somebody said was, wow, Sree, you have really become old. Christoph has stayed the same, those who knew both of us. But what's so interesting about this is Christoph has chosen to stay away from this world of social media. So here we were both 20 years ago, roughly the same amount of interest, same demographics, both graduated from journalism school, but he went in this direction, more thoughtful, writing deep books, doing documentaries, that kind of work. And I went into this 120, 140 character world. And I know that he probably spends more time reading than I do, is more thoughtful than I am, spends more time with Daniela than I probably do with my wife, because he's not distracted by all the things that can happen on social media. By the way, if he knew I was going to make him a centerpiece of my lecture, he would not have come, because he's a very shy guy. So I asked him about Twitter, and he said, I do tweet, except what I do is I do it in a compressed manner in 300 pages once every 2 years, meaning he writes a book of his thoughts, rather than wasting his time like the rest of us who do tweet, who are constantly posting and sharing information. So anyway, that's Christoph Poschenrieder, and I think I've embarrassed him enough. You think that's enough? Yes? Okay. Let's think of today's lecture as a series of stories. I told you the story of me and my friend. I'm going to tell you a story about this flower. Anybody know what kind of flower this is? Anyone know? It's a flower. Yes, my twins are here. My father is here. My mother is here, and my twins, who are 9 years old, are here. They're not on Facebook. They're not on Twitter, but they are on iPhone and iPad to play with it. And they already declared my lecture very boring. So they're not. I'm surprised he even heard me when I said it's a flower. Anybody know what exactly the flower is? It doesn't matter if you don't know, but I was just curious if you know. So this is a jasmine flower. My mother knows because in India, in Kerala, they wear jasmine's flower in their hair at night. And so she knows that. So anyway, this is a story that I'm going to tell you about the flower and a horse. I'm going to come back to the story of the flower, but I'm going to first tell you about the horse. Those are my twins, and this is a horse that they encountered. And this just happened this week in Germany. And this is a quote about horses. It says, this is from the Emperor Wilhelm II, it says, "I do believe in the horse. The automobile is no more than a transitory phenomenon." Right? Basically, he said that the horses are here to stay. This thing called the automobile is a waste of time. So you can imagine where this is the first exhibit in the museum, the only museum in the world which would start with this. Anybody know which museum it is? That's correct. It's the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart. That's how they start their exhibit, is with this horse, to make the point that you are going to see lots of things that that people who are skeptical of horses, of automobiles, and said that the horses were not necessary, or were necessary, and cars are unnecessary. Well, what I found interesting about this is that in the museum itself, they have a documentary about life in post-war Germany with all the shortages and things they had. One of the main modes of transportation they talk about is the horse. Because they had trouble getting materials and there were no cars, or as many cars could be built, until production started, they went back to the horse. And that's one of the cases I want to make today, that we're not in a zero-sum game, meaning that if there's only going to be horses or only going to be cars. As you know, there are still horses, millions of them, and there's horse riding and other ways in which we use the horse. It's just not the focal point of transportation the way it used to be. And that's what's going to happen with communications as well. It is not all going to be a zero-sum game, where if you like social media, you have to hate traditional media. If you like Facebook, you have to hate something else. That is not the case. We can, in fact, live together the way the horse and the car have lived and do live together. Even in Austria, when you go, there are horses you can see around in the park and other places. Here I'm going to share with you the dirty secret of social media. The dirty secret is that almost everyone will miss almost everything you do on social media. What do I mean by that? I mean that almost everything that you do will not be seen by the people you're trying to reach. So you might say, wait a minute, it's such a beautiful day. I gave up the first day of summer. The European Championships are going to start in a couple of hours, to come listen to a guy who says that no one will see social media. What is the point of this? Well, the point is that this is true about social media, but it is also true about other forms of media. In New York, I'm on TV once a week on CBS, which is a big television network. But my co-workers typically don't watch me. So people in my building don't watch me. People in my own apartment don't watch me. The other day, my wife promised, she said, honey, we'll make sure we see your appearance on TV this morning. So I come back, I'm on at 6:45 in the morning. So I came back and said, so did you watch me? And she said, well, we were switching channels and we came across the penguins of Madagascar. And the twins picked penguins over daddy. And so that happens. Some of you are familiar with the story of this mosque that was going to be created near the site of the September 11th attacks of 2001. This kind of made some international news. They're going to start a mosque. That story was broken on the front page of the New York Times by one of my students. Front page of the New York Times, 1 December. But it made almost no splash, even though this happened. It didn't make a real splash until the following May, during American election season, when Sarah Palin, the former vice presidential candidate, started talking about it and called it a victory mosque and brought attention to it in a new way. So one of the lessons is you can have a story on the front page of the New York Times and people may not pay attention. You could have somebody on TV and people in their own house won't watch them. So while this is true of social media, it is also true of regular media as well. It's just that at a time when there's so much noise, it's just easier to dismiss what happens on social media. I like to call social media email without the guilt. What that means is when you have email piling up, you feel bad, right? Because you know you owe someone a reply. The good news about social media, if you miss it, it doesn't matter because you can come back to it later, or it'll resurface if it's important, or it'll stay and you'll see it after a while. Let me show you this Facebook posting by James Stavridis. And this is the admiral in charge of NATO's operations in Libya. And last year, after the death of Gaddafi, he posted this Facebook posting about ending NATO operations in Libya. Now, what is interesting about this is he did this half an hour before the press conference and before the press release. Why would he do this? Why would they put this out there before the press conference or the press release? Any thoughts on why he would do that? He didn't know better, as somebody said. Okay. Maybe that's a reason. But this is also the new way of communication. And what you're doing is you want your content to show up in the hands of the people who really care and are interested in the topics you're working on. So what I mean by that is you're looking here at the admiral knows that one of his audiences is the people of Libya, right? And he's more likely to reach them through Facebook than he is if he's just going to post, send a press release. After all, the people of Libya are not on nato.gov/we-will-bomb-you, sitting there waiting to get the latest news from NATO. They're doing their own thing, and this injects your content into the conversation that's already taking place. And that's something that I think is one of the reasons you would do this. The other reason is you can see what we call social actions, almost 500 likes, shares, and comments to a piece of content. So you're not just, in the old days of just traditional websites, you hit a website and it just, the person visiting it just visits it and goes away. Now, if they are able to take some action, they're sharing it, they're talking about it, and they're getting more attention to something that otherwise they may not ever see. Other people may never see this. And that's why social media is used this way. NATO and US Department of Defense social media policy gives Facebook postings and tweets the same authority and credibility as a press release. That's sort of a new way of thinking about content and how to share it and when to share it. Let's look a little bit at the world of Facebook and how it's growing. This is a map showing Facebook connections. Each point of light is 500 connections. And what I like about this is that Jakarta is as bright as any place in Europe, any place in New York. Right? So that tells you how social media isn't just in the developing or the developed world, but also in the developing world. This is a list of the 10 largest countries on Facebook. And when you look at it, what jumps out at you? What strikes you when you look at this? Anybody? You see a lot of developing countries on there. UK used to be number 2. You can see it's fallen this far. And you can see that there are a couple of European countries here. You see France and Germany. But you see it dominated by Brazil, India, Turkey, etc. A study has shown that by the end of the year 2014, the largest country on Facebook is going to be India. But Indians were not on this list even 18 months before it broke into the top 10. So I got a call from a reporter at Newsweek saying, Sree, why do Indians like Facebook? I said Indians don't like Facebook. Indians love Facebook because we're a very nosy people. And we want to know what's happening and what's going on in everybody's lives. And Facebook is kind of perfect for that. Here is a look at the 10 fastest growing countries, not over last week, but over a 1-week period earlier in the year. And when I look at this, what jumps out at me is that if I were from the royal family of Saudi Arabia, I'd be very worried. Can you see that? Because 250,000 people joined Facebook. If you're a dictatorship and 250,000 of your people do anything, you should be really, really scared. and that's what you see there. And then you see some other countries as well where lots of people are joining Facebook. And I'd be curious, how many of you are on Facebook? Raise your hand, just look around you. It's kind of interesting. You see, I'd say about 80%, right? How many of you are on Twitter? Twitter, okay, about 40%. That's very high. And it's really nice to see you here. But for the people who are not on Facebook, are not on Twitter, that's fine too. You're like my friend Christoph. You're reading better, you have better relationships, and more meaningful life, maybe. At least you have no excuse for not having those things. The rest of us have Facebook and social media as an excuse. I have a colleague who is not on Facebook, and he tells me that his wife, every night, she puts the kids to bed, and then she says goodbye, and she goes to Facebook land for 2 or 3 hours. And I told him, you know, if she was going every night to a dance club, you would be curious, right? At least if maybe you should join Facebook and see what she's doing. I'm not saying spy on her, but just to know what she's doing. So after all, she's telling the world, aren't you at least a little curious about it? At any point, if you have a question, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll also have a Q&A session that Andy will be moderating a little later. So these two sets of numbers, I think, are very interesting to see how that's growing and how people get on and try to get more information about the kind of what's happening in social media. This is a map of the world on social media in June 2009, and you can see how much blue there is and all these different networks. What's interesting, of course, is that China is not on Facebook. China has banned Twitter, has banned Facebook, and banned YouTube, but they have their own versions of it. I was talking to a group of 100 Chinese college students. They came to New York, and I had a lecture prepared about something else, about multimedia storytelling. The only thing they were interested in was Facebook. They all wanted to see it, wanted to test it out, wanted me to show them how it works. So that tells you that there's kind of an interest in that anyway. So here, you can't see from where you're sitting, but these are all different social networks. My favorite name for a social network of all time is on the screen. It's here, and it's called Wretch, W-R-E-T-C-H. I don't know what the German translation of it is, but it's not a typical word you use for friends, right? So how did this work exactly? Be my wretch, or wretch me? I'm not sure exactly how this worked, but this is a network that did exist. 2 years later, you can see how much more blue the world is. And you can see what happened where all these countries turned to Facebook as the main network. But you see that in Brazil, they're on a network called Orkut, O-R-K-U-T, which is the most popular one there, but 47 million people are also on Facebook. So it's one of the few countries where they have both networks in operation at the same time, which I think is very exciting, because that tells you that people are able to do more than one network and take it seriously. When you ask Brazilians, they say Orkut is to talk to each other. Facebook is to talk to the world. And you know they're getting the World Cup, they're getting the Olympics, so they're going to be even more invested into Facebook as time goes along. Now, what happens on Facebook is that relationships change. Right? My mom became my friend on Facebook about 4.5 years ago. My father about 5 years ago. And they now have more insight, or what appears to be insight, into our lives. They see more photos of the kids than ever before. I see more photos of my dad playing golf around the world than ever before. But you know what really changed was the relationship when, about 3 years ago, my mother-in-law became my friend on Facebook. Because mothers-in-law and son-in-laws typically don't talk a lot, don't have a lot of conversations, maybe once in a while, but Facebook changes all that. So here's a hypothetical conversation a hypothetical mother-in-law could have with a hypothetical son-in-law. Son, I see you made a new friend today. Who is she? Why did you make her your friend? Or you could have, she could say, son, you have a lot of friends, but you hit like today only on one person's comments. Why her? Why did you do it? Again, this is all hypothetical. It didn't happen. But the idea of what happens with Facebook is so interesting. And talking about it in Europe, I think, is also interesting, because in Europe, the folks here take issues of privacy and confidentiality much more seriously, perhaps, than they do in the United States. I'm not saying people don't care about it, but here you have driven, in fact, places like Facebook to pay more attention to this. Facebook now offers the ability for you to download a copy of all your Facebook data in one button. If you just go to the account settings on Facebook, there's a single button, you can download all of it. Now, that came about in part because European regulators forced Facebook to do that. But here's what happened. Facebook obeyed the spirit of the law, obeyed the letter of the law or the request, but not the spirit of it. Because if you go on there, if you request, has anybody done this? Have you requested your Facebook data? 1, 2 people, 3. Maybe you'll go home and you'll all request it. I must warn you though, it doesn't appear as some nice PDF or some nice PowerPoint presentation. They give it to you in the least useful format possible. It's basically a data dump of every friend request you ever made, every chat conversation you ever had, everything you thought you deleted. It's all sitting on the Facebook server and now is downloaded onto your laptop. So if you're worried about privacy, now it's much easier for somebody to break into your laptop than break into the Facebook server. So I would urge you to think about whether you're going to do it or not, and why do you want this? Some things might be better buried in the clouds of Facebook. That's totally your own option, of course, to think about. Whenever we talk about social media, there are people who point to one of the great writers in America, is a gentleman named Malcolm Gladwell. Are you folks familiar with him? He wrote a book called Blink. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point, and he's a man who sells millions of books and is a writer for the New Yorker magazine. He's a very well-known writer, and he has lots to say about social media. In fact, everything he has to say, he put into an article on social media called Small Change. And it was called Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted. And it was a condemnation of everything about social media. That social media is a waste of time, that social media is useless, that social media has no future. I wonder if he and Christoph had a conversation before he wrote this. And what happened is that he just said that social media cannot provide the social change that is required, right? But unlike my friend Christoph, he's not someone who uses technology. Christoph happens to be someone who knows and uses technology, loves technology, but Malcolm Gladwell is not using social media. In fact, all his decision about social media was based on having tweeted 10 times plus 22 times over 2 separate accounts. We're not even sure which of these is his account because he doesn't use them anymore, but he did at one point tweet from one of these accounts. So this is a man who hasn't used it, who decided in the fall of 2010 to write about what a waste of time social media is. But if you really want to think about what happened a few months later in Egypt and the Arab world, then you come to this graphic. This is a graphic that talks about internet traffic in Egypt 2 days after the start of the Egyptian revolution. And what you can see here is that the Egyptian government killed the internet. And someone had a great tweet about this naturally. They said, the Egyptian government shut down the internet so that Malcolm Gladwell would not be wrong. That's how much Hosni loves Malcolm. But he was, of course, wrong because he wasn't using social media himself. And that's one of the mistakes you make about social media, is if you don't use it, you can't understand both its potential and its problems, both the opportunities and the pitfalls. So part of the story here is that the Egyptian government understood what I was talking about, connecting the physical and the digital. So they realized it is not enough to beat up the people in Tahrir Square. You have to beat them up on the digital side as well. So they killed the internet and they killed them in the streets of Tahrir Square. You need both in order to do this. One of the governments that has understood this in addition to Egypt is the Chinese government. And you might know that in China today, in Tibet, every week a young man or young woman wraps themselves up in a blanket, pours kerosene on it, and sets themselves on fire. Right? You may have heard about this. There's been some news. 30 people have been killed. But because there is no digital connection to that, nobody knows about it, and no one's up in arms about it or upset about it the way they would be if it was being tweeted and Facebooked every day. So the government of China really understood this. And that brings me to think a little bit more about that Chinese connection in a minute, but I also want to show you something else from Egypt. For anyone who ever says Twitter is a waste of time, I show them this tweet. Does everyone know what this is saying here? This is basically an evacuation order by the State Department. Let's say you're an American in Egypt during Tahrir Square. They don't send you a limousine to your hotel saying, would you like to join us as we evacuate? They tweet. If you're an American citizen who steps out of the country without following TravelGov, you're doing so blindly, right? Because you're not paying attention. But when I look at this tweet, I think of something else. I think about the helicopter leaving the roof of the US Embassy in, anybody remember this? In Vietnam, right? At the end of the Vietnam War, there was a helicopter leaving in Saigon, the US Embassy. How did people know to come to the US Embassy at that time? They knew because of word of mouth. Today's word of mouth is on social media. So I tell people, you don't have to do this, you don't have to spend all your time on there, but think about how you can do this within reason, and also to use it as a listening channel instead of just a broadcasting channel. Now back to the flower that I mentioned. So you remember, this is the jasmine flower. Well, before Egypt, and by the way, as you know, we're right in the middle of the Egyptian revolution, still continues, and you're seeing the power of the military and how they're curtailing the rights of people still today. And it shows you that all this digital stuff is not enough. You've got to have control and power in more traditional ways. But before Egypt, there was the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia. Some of you might remember that. And a government that understood that they have to worry about this was, again, the Chinese government. So you know what they did? They banned the typing of the word jasmine in any social networks. So you couldn't physically type the word jasmine. But they understood that that is not enough. To block it online is not enough, in the digital space is not enough. So you know what they did? They banned the jasmine flower itself, and that causing a collapse of the jasmine market in China. They went in and physically ripped out the flowers because they were thinking that maybe men and women will take jasmine flowers and put them in their pockets, or like my mother, put it in their hair and be some kind of signal that we are pro-revolution. So this is how they understood. The physical and the digital need to be something to think about. As luck would have it, this year, as they do every year in China, there's also the anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre on June 4th, 1989, which some of you might remember was a big news event. And the Chinese government was very, very careful about this. They monitor the digital and the physical around the anniversary. So what happened last week that you could not have scripted? This is what happened. The Shanghai Stock Exchange fell exactly 64.89 points, which to some people reads like June 4th, 1989. And someone said, well, this must have been a hacking job, and it must be an American, because in Asia they would write 4-6, and not 6489. But the Chinese government wouldn't take a chance. And you know what they did? They banned searches for the word Shanghai, stock exchange, and even the word today that day on social media. So any country or any government that is so worried about the word today is a country that understands the power of social and digital media. Let's change gears a little bit and tell you a couple of other stories. There's an airline in America called AirTran, and anyone who's flown to America might know of this. But this is the kind of comments that people make all the time about their experiences when they're unhappy with something, right? And I don't know if there are any European airlines like this. We will not ask for any names, but there might be some that you might feel like this about. People are constantly sharing what they are feeling out there. But what I tell people is that what you're posting and what you're sharing can have an effect where people are listening and can respond. In this kind of case, I presume that AirTran, just kind of this is the cost of doing business. But I want to take you to another thing that happens on planes. When you're on the tarmac, you're still not taken off, and the captain comes on to say, we're having engine trouble, and we are going to cancel the flight. So about 15 years ago, the people who had an advantage at the moment, you know what I'm talking about, right? As soon as that happens, you have to grab all your suitcases and try to escape to get to an agent to rebook your flight. Whenever that happened, 15 years ago, the people who had an advantage were the people who had a cell phone, because they could call the agent and get rebooked. Today, when that happens, nobody has an advantage because everybody has a cell phone, right? So there are a group of people who do have an advantage. Those are the people who know how to use Twitter. Because today, if I'm on a Delta flight and this happens, I'm confident that I will get rebooked before I even get off the plane. Because all you do is you tweet at Delta Assist and say, this flight has been canceled, I need to be in Chicago by 5 p.m., and they will rebook you. And these are examples from Delta Assist of people talking about their service. A big thank you to Delta Assist, prompt response and easy rebooking through Atlanta, fantastic customer service. This is kind of the new way in which companies are connecting and listening to their customers. And so, would you rather be in a business where people are saying these kinds of things about you, or they're saying these kinds of things about you, right? One of the ideas that I've thought about, and a lot of other people in social media have thought about, is that if you're good in real life, you can be great on social media. If you're great in real life, you can be amazing on social media. But if you have bad customer service, bad ethics, bad products, bad ideas, you will be terrible on social media. Because what social media can do is amplify everything you do. If you're good, make you better. If you're bad, make you worse. So that's one of the problems of social media. And during the Q&A, I presume we'll get to talk about that a little bit. I wanted to start wrapping up by telling you about another person named, about another name, and to show you this, this name card that was made for me. My name is so long that you may not notice it's actually a typo on there. Does everybody see it? It was actually made into a Russian man, as you can see, by adding the OF on there. As you can see that, right? So I looked at this and I thought that this was a typo. I think they meant to say Sree Sreenivasan of Columbia University, but they jammed it all together. This was at the United Nations, and they jammed it all together. So I thought about it, and I decided that this was actually a tribute to one of my favorite writers, somebody named Christoph, but with a different Christoph and a different spelling, this gentleman named Nicholas Kristof. I don't know if anyone here knows about him, but he's a world-traveling New York Times journalist who covered the Tiananmen Square and won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Tiananmen Square, along with his wife, Sheryl Wu Dunn. So I decided that this was going to be my tribute to Nick Kristof. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could, for his birthday, get people to change their name to add the OF to their name. And so, as you can see, I added an OF to my name. And thousands of people around the world started adding OF to their name. And they were able to, you can see one of my favorite names is Patel off, Evans off. I was hoping my friend Nielsen off, I see Nielsen off. I was hoping my friend Lance Ulanoff would change his name to Ulanoff off, but that didn't happen. I don't think that happened anyway. But this is interesting, and this was kind of an interesting picture that happened. Conversations happened around the world about this. So here is somebody noticing that her friend had changed his name and said, "What's with your name? Have you just returned from Russia?" And he said, "No, we are doing this for Nick Kristoff's birthday." This is an example of a woman named E.F. Stewart who added OF to her name and connected this, and she took a picture and put this on the internet. And this was kind of a fun exercise just to see, are you able to connect people to interesting ideas? Even a dog changed its name from Alice to Alice off. Nick Kristoff responded and he said, "Huge thanks to the birthday wishes and Kristoffizing around the world. Better than any award." This is a man who's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And he said, "I have a lump in my keyboard." And he was just kind of having fun with this. But we also tried to make it an opportunity to raise some money for and some attention to the companies and nonprofits that he likes, including some of these. And you can see Amnesty International said thank you on social media for this. That's one of the ways you work, is you say thank you on social media. But not everybody was happy with what I did. Here is somebody called Africa is a Country. What kind of self-respecting J-school professor would come up with this crap and posted this? By the way, they had at least 6 posts like this. This was the cleanest, nicest thing they said about me that week. I was first worried that it was Nelson Mandela himself saying this. I was very, very upset, but it turned out it wasn't Nelson Mandela, so it was okay. But he was, of course, they were angry with me about this. But this is sort of that world we live in social media, where you're seeing how connections are made and how people are able to see what you're doing. So one of my lessons from this was that physical and digital, and that to get people's attention, you need an interesting idea. There's a time when we're slammed with too many things coming at us at all times. You may have seen this number that 2 years ago, there were 24 hours of video posted on YouTube every minute. Last year, that number was 48 hours every minute. This year, they just released the numbers. It's 72 hours of video on YouTube every minute. I tell people that if you have a secret video you want no one to see, post it on YouTube, and you're guaranteed that nobody will see it. Because one of the things we've learned with all of this stuff is that it's not enough to just have great content. You have to know how to bring attention to it, and social media can play a role in that process. I'm going to show you a couple of things that perhaps you have not seen and not dealt with before. Just wanted to show you a product called Geofeedia. Geofeedia. This is a recent-ish product. And what it does is it pulls up tweets, Instagram, YouTube videos on any address that you type in. Do you recognize the city behind you, right? You see that's Vienna? And here are people posting all kinds of things. Let's go in here. Somebody went and posted this someplace in Europe. I mean, they just said someplace in Europe. Here is someplace that they looked. Here's something else they posted. So people are just, a lot of food is being posted on social media, right? There's a famous tweet. Somebody said, "I'm so upset that Twitter is banned in China. That means 1.5 billion people, 1.2 billion people will not know what I ate for breakfast." Right? You're just seeing people posting all kinds of things on Flickr. Here's a gentleman, I presume, named Austrian Psycho. Wouldn't you like to get to know Austrian Psycho and get to know this person? And they posted this. Let's see what else I can find. This is, he says, boring lecture. So I would be worried about this, but fortunately this was at 4:42 p.m. before this started. I'm sure some of you have posted the same thing, but I've not called it up here. But this was 4:42 p.m. by the Levty posted. I don't know if he's here. Maybe he's posted the same thing. And just posted that right on there. So when you look at something like GeoFeedy, I'm sure in the Q&A you'll have this question: what does this mean for privacy? And what are the issues that are raised by something like this, where you can go in and see a tweet from anybody, you can put in an address, you can zoom in right to a particular home, and you can see the tweets around it. And you can go in and look at that. What does that mean? The other day I did this and I found a woman had taken a photograph. She'd come out of the shower, she was wearing a towel, and posted it on Instagram. And you could see the house where she lived, right on social media. So there are lots of issues, of course, that social media is raising as well. And now I just want to wrap up by showing you a couple of things that are happening on Facebook, because after all, Facebook is the dominant social network, and it keeps changing. I like to say that my children get to eat because Mark Zuckerberg changes things on Facebook every few weeks. And he changed things again, where he introduced the timeline, the big cover image, subscribers, smarter lists, and all of this was done because last year they were facing a lot of issues. The privacy concerns of Facebook were just part of it, but also the rise of Google+, the rise of Twitter, all of that, and they were concerned about it and wanted to pay attention to it. And you can see that one of the things they did was they went right after Twitter. In the old days of Facebook, meaning 3 months ago, 4 months ago, the only way you could see my Facebook postings was if you were a friend of mine. If you wanted to see my thoughts without being a friend, you would join me on Twitter. But now they created this thing called subscribers, so that people could see your content without being your friend, your public content without being your friend. And that changes how you use Facebook. And you can in fact now go and see Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Zuck, Z-U-C-K. And you can see, by the way, that's his dog. That's the most famous dog on the internet. His name is Beast. And he has 11 million subscribers. They also introduced this thing called the timeline that you've seen. There was something on social media we call security by obscurity, meaning something exists, but you will never find it because it's too hard to get to. If you remember on Facebook, you have to get to a piece of content, you have to hit, older post, you get to yesterday. Older post, get to last week. Now, you can get directly, in a couple of clicks, to the moment in 2004 when he launched the wall on Facebook. So those of you who are on Facebook know this was a kind of a big milestone in the life of Facebook. This changes things. That's what Facebook is doing when it brings these changes so drastically that it changes, as I said, relationships and how people connect. And it's something that we should all be very aware of. I believe Facebook is underappreciated and under-criticized. Meaning it's underappreciated as a place of business, underappreciated as a way of bringing attention to things, but it's under-criticized for all the issues it's been dealing with in terms of privacy and how fast and how quickly it changes. I wanted to show you a couple of signs of the times. This is the New Yorker cover from a few months ago, and you can see they have the buffering symbol right on the cover of the magazine. When I posted this on my CNET blog, somebody posted in the comments, I waited 5 minutes for the picture to load. He didn't understand that this was the image itself. But we spend so much time looking at this buffering that we're constantly worried about how much time we have to wait. There used to be something called WWW, the World Wide Wait. Does anybody remember this? Where you'd pull up a website and pull up a magazine and you would hit next, you read the magazine, hit next, you read the magazine. That's how we used to do things. But now we don't need to because things are faster. But what's happened is we are as impatient today as we were in those days, even though the wait is microseconds and not longer. Another sign, this thing, the hashtags. I know not everybody here is on Twitter, so you don't necessarily understand the hashtag,
But here is a magazine which put a hashtag on the cover. A hashtag basically gives you a digital fence to build a conversation and to track a conversation afterwards. People are going to talk about you anyway, so why not give them your hashtag so that people can see and follow the conversation, or so that you can see and follow the conversation. This is an example of this from an event we do in New York every year called Social Media Weekend. And this is the hashtag of the conference. We have 500 people from 12 countries gather every year at Columbia. But when you look at this, there are, as you will see here, 12,000 tweets and 2,000 contributors. So if there are only 500 people in the room, but 2,000 people participated in the conversation with a total reach of 8.4 million. That's the number of followers these 2,000 people had, was 8.4 million, and they resulted in 45 million impressions. All of this we know because we were able to track the hashtag. And this is a new product called hash tracking. If you're interested, they're looking for people to test it out. But this is a sign of where we're going with events. You saw that they announced the hashtag in advance. That's partly how events are going to happen. You're going to know and keep track of the hashtag. There's a New Yorker cartoon. At the start of a funeral, somebody raises his hand and says, "Hey, what's the hashtag for the funeral?" So I hope we'll never get to that point. So I want to leave you, before we do Q&A, Andy's going to come up, with the social media success formula. Are you all ready for that? Yes? Okay. So the social media success formula is a way in which anybody who is doing any communications can be successful if they follow this formula. It is a series of words, just a series of words, and these are all ways in which I think of how you should be on social media to be successful. And if you follow this formula, you will have thousands of followers and lots of success. You might even be able to IPO very shortly. So let me give you the success. It starts with the word helpful. Helpful, so we're going to start with that. And we are going to just read it. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend we're in church on Sunday, led by a Hindu priest, which is very awkward, right? So we're going to be led by a Hindu priest, but we're going to be on church on Sunday. We're going to read these words really loud and really clear. All right, so here we go. Everybody ready? Be loud. Look at this room, by the way. If you haven't looked around this room, what a fabulous room this is. So this will give you a chance to read and shout to the rafters. I feel like I'm in a cathedral anyway, so this is good. Okay, ready? Yes. Okay, I want to hear. Are you guys going to be loud? Let me hear the word yes. All right, good. Okay. Who's ready for some football? Who's ready for football? Yes. All right. Here's how we're going to do that. My son is ready. Okay, here we go. We're going to read this together. Helpful. Useful. Come on. Informative. Relevant. I can't hear you. Practical. Come on, louder. Actionable. Sing it, sister. Hallelujah. Louder. Amen. Right? You need a Hindu to teach you how to end a formula. All right. So this is the formula for success on social media. Doesn't mean every item has to be there in all your Facebook postings or all your tweets. But if you can have some of these, you will be successful. But if you look at this list very carefully, you'll realize that that there's no secret here, right? This is the success formula for anything you do in any form of communications. If you are only thinking of yourself and not your audience, you will not participate in this way. But if you're a scientist, you're a journalist, you're a businessman, you're a nonprofit executive, anything you do, you should be thinking of communicating with these items in your communications. And with that, I'll pause here. Thank you very much, everybody.